We are facing over 500 years of a settler colonial state, of a genocide of indigenous peoples. We, in 2019, are also recognizing that it was 400 years since the first enslaved African was brought over to Jamestown. We are also understanding that this is an economy, a 200-year-old fossil fuel economy that has been destroying our planet and destroying our communities. And we are bringing all these histories and experiences to this space and moment. But equally as important is that there has always been resistance, self-determined communities, and leaders, and courage to fight against this violence and oppressive system. From the get-go, we have the Taino fighting against Columbus. We have Afro-descendant and Black people fighting against and fighting for Black communities. We have self-determinants with leaders like Fannie Lou Hamer, who not only fought back, but built. We also recognize our international folks from the first successful slave rebellion in Haiti, and the Black folks down there and the indigenous folks fighting against these systems. And we also want to recognize that we have been doing this for centuries. We also want to recognize in 2019 that it's also going to be the 50-year anniversary of the Stonewall riots. So our LGBTQ folks have been fighting. Many of you know Grace Lee Boggs from Detroit. Yes. She said, "People are aware that they cannot continue in the same old way, but are mobilized because they cannot imagine an alternative. We need a vision that recognizes that we are at one of the great turning points in human history, when the survival of our planet and the restoration of our humanity require a great sea change in our ecological, economic, political, and spiritual values." That vision sits in this very room and in frontline communities around the world. We are ready and we have been ready.
Yes.
We are practicing and living our power in our communities. And with that, I would like to do a very brief intro into our panelists who have been doing this work for generations, for years. And this is a very brief intro, so I'll be asking them in their first question to also do a quick intro and background into the work that you do. But first, we have Joaquin Lujan, one of the co-founders of SWAP in Albuquerque. Holly Acuna, co-founder of Cooperation Jackson in Mississippi. Elizabeth Young-Pierre, executive director of Uprose in Brooklyn, New York. And Chief Benoit, president of the Hunicris People Federation of the Brazilian Amazon in Acre, Brazil. So I'm going to first start, and panelists, you have about 5 minutes for this first question. And so first, I would like to ask you all, why just transition and why now? And what are some of the powerful organizing strategies and stories that you have seen or used to build power to advance just transition?
I should have said it the other end. Well, first of all, I'd like to identify myself as a mestizo. My culture is made up of indigenous, Mexicano, and Espanol, and we date back here, but also go back to 500 years. My family, just about a mile from here, go back 300 years. And so we're pretty much, I guess you could say, the creation of that first invasion. And so nevertheless, in all these years we grew and we are still growing. And so when I'm looking at all these words are new, climate justice, environmental justice, I tend to approach that in two different ways. The first way is culturally. And so in my culture, going way back, we live at the edge of the Chihuahua Desert. And so the climate and the environment has always been important. And in our culture, we would also use religion to help us get through the tough times. So when we would get together through our church, we would go out in procession in hopes that we would get more rain because the season is here, it's a little dry, and so let's see if we can get a little bit of help. Our communities were all farming communities, the Chicano communities. We ended up developing between the pueblos. And so you have Cochiti Pueblo, and then you have Bernalillo, which was Chicano, and then you have Santa Ana, Sandia, all the other ones. My point being that at that particular point in our communities, we had the power. We had our water that was being used by our communities. In the community, we would decide who the mayordomo would be, the person that would distribute the water fairly amongst our communities. And so we look at it that way, even in our sayings, in our dichos, reflect to the environment. If somebody would say to you, buenos dias de Dios, ¿cómo está? Good morning, how are you? And usually the response would be, oh, entre verde y seco. We're somewhere between dry and green. And so we would relate based on the environment as to how we would try to describe how we were doing. Those were I got to see the last of that as a young child here. And so going back, there was that part and looking at the environment that way. During the time that the white settlers started coming in, we started looking at the environment a little bit different because they started taking control of our water. Our communities no longer control that water. And so we have to look at that, how we're gonna deal with that. And as they grew big, when you look at Albuquerque grew from where you're at right now, heading up towards the mountains. All the communities were up and down the Rio Grande amongst the pueblos and the Chicano communities. And so they put the railroad there. And so right here where you're at right now in this spot here is where they first started setting up the sawmills to start building housing for Albuquerque to grow. We didn't need that much lumber. Our houses were made out of adobe, out of dirt. And so again, here they are stripping our forests. They start taking over our land, and they start farming, and they start using pesticides. They start using all kinds of things. And again, we're at the edge of the desert. This is our only one river that we have here. So as Chicano people, we have been struggling for a whole long time. And it's important to say also that as the white settlers, the U.S. government felt pretty comfortable here in Nuevo Mexico. Then they developed Los Alamos, and they developed that awful bomb that they first set up. They take that baby to southern New Mexico, and where they explode that thing to see if it's going to work, without talking to any of the communities, whether it's indigenous, Chicano, whatever the folks were. They just exploded that. And so that was 70 years ago. Today, there are still people dying of cancer in those communities close to that area. And it's just, we're still dealing with that. So our struggle has not stopped, whether we're dealing for the environment or climate justice. I know I'm getting close to my 5 minutes. It's probably already passed now.
Thank you.
Time's up. I'm sorry I have 5 minutes to describe where we come from, but we can still talk later.
So I think it's still morning. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, I think the conversation definitely always requires more than 5 minutes. So I'm gonna try to distill a few things, at least from my vantage point. One thing I think is critical, I would raise to note in line with that. Before the introduction of settler colonialism and capitalism, most of our cultures tried to live in some balance and harmony with the environment that we had, based upon eons and eons of knowing if we take too much from the environment, we all gonna suffer. I think that was a generalized knowledge that most folks have, but you put in some new dynamics around profit being more of a motive than the well-being of even yourself at times. You change the dynamic. That's still the world that we are living in and the logic that we are embedded in. And I'm bringing that up because I'd like to pose that that part of that's at the root of the just transition question is a different logic, right? What I would call in short an anti-capitalist logic that has to be rooted there. Because if we think we're going to use the same extractive, exploitative ways to create change, we're just going to really exasperate what's already failing. And I think that's the critical thing to note. And the part of the question says, well, why now? I think there's two parts. So one is we've always been striving to do this. If you look at the maroon communities, if you look at the indigenous communities, that could always, even if it was for a generation, break free, from the grip of settler colonialism and capitalism. Folks always tried to return back to a practice of balance, right? Wherever we find it, it was always a return. Because they were operating within a different logic. They did not accept the logic that was imposed upon them and the relations that was imposed upon them. We, unfortunately, most of us have lived with the logic of that imposition. And we got to work our way out of that, which is not easy, because it's not just remembering, it's also, I think as Tamara brought up, how do you create new practices? And that is easier said than done because of the enculturation that we've all been locked into, right? Learning how to be democratic is a struggle. It's not something I think really comes automatically to most of us anymore because we haven't lived in a democratic culture. We don't even know what that really feels like in any fundamental way, despite, this little vote every 2 or 4 years. That's not really democracy. That's more how do you keep one order of control basically in place and get us all to rationalize it. That's basically what that exercise fundamentally is. But I think the critical thing in terms of the why now, the quote from Grace Lee Boggs, I think, really is a great summary. The system overall is in a deepening crisis. And despite, I'm gonna just use that as an example, despite what most of us think about Trump, he is a reflection of where the system is at. He's not an aberration in any fundamental way, right? His style may be a little bit brash, but in terms of the actual concrete policies and practices that have been put in place, the other side of that coin has been moving in that same direction for quite some time, just with a little bit more savvy, a little bit more style. So I think for us is to recognize the reality of that and realize they can't govern in a new way, and that presents us with a profound amount of opportunity. And I think the question is, can we gather ourselves and organize ourselves in a manner that exploits the opportunities that exist? That's a challenge that I think we have.
Ayer, mi gente poderosa y bella, un placer estar aquí con ustedes. I am also, in addition to being the Executive Director of UPROS, I have the honor to be the co-chair of the Climate Justice Alliance, and that gives me tremendous joy to be in this space with you and to feel your presence and also the presence of your ancestors that are standing right with you, because we are the descendants of extraction. We are the children of those that survived. And so when the IPCC report came out and climate activists freaked out and started talking about it being our existential threat, I thought about my ancestors. I thought about those that came through the Mid-Atlantic Passage, those that survived and those that didn't. I thought about our indigenous people, those who survived and those who didn't, because we have faced existential threats before. And so we are prepared to address this one by reclaiming our traditions and our people being aligned, because one of the threats right now to being able to address climate change is privilege. There's a new colonialism out there, and it's a new climate colonialism where people are descending into our communities to tell us what the solutions are, what power looks like, and even choosing our leaders for us. And so we need to be aligned and understand that we are living with our power, that we have been leading. My grandmother comes from a place in Puerto Rico where she was brought to a town where half of her children died because of extraction. Because she came from an agricultural place and was brought to a place where they were exposed to disease and didn't survive. My mother was the one who survived. So as the child of my mother, and something that my mother said, and I've said it talks for about 20 years, I said I came out of the womb with the fist first. We are either healers or warriors. We are contemporary warriors, and we need to feel that. And I share this with you because the language of just transition only embodies what we have been doing for a minute, honoring Mother Earth, healing each other, being in community. In our community in New York City and Brooklyn, we are in the bastion of capitalism in New York, right? Dealing with everybody buzzing around, trying to be us, trying to pick our brains, trying to extract our struggle and the things that we have learned by doing the work, so that then they can replace us, write a proposal, do the work, and marginalize us and make us the brown and black faces of an agenda that was ours anyway. And so we have to. So a just transition really means owning your power and decolonizing and not letting people step into the space. This movement needs a lot of different voices, a lot of different processes, a lot of different ways of addressing a very complex issue. When the Green New Deal popped up and everybody was running like lemmings, right? And an activist who's worth anything doesn't sign a blank check. That's what my husband says, and he is so right. He's over there. An activist will say, what does this mean for my people? Well, how does that show up in our community? Let me check it out to see if this is something that benefits this. Something that was created without us at the table raises a lot of questions. So the climate justice movement moved really quickly and put out a platform that transformed the discourse across the country. That is living with our power and leading with our power, walking with our power. So, what do I do in Brooklyn? What do? I fight. And so we have, in Sunset Park, we've doubled the amount of open space. We've stopped the siting of a power plant. We've helped pass legislation. We organized the largest gathering of young people of color in the United States on climate change, because honestly, our movements have always been intergenerational. This idea of youth-led is also extractive. We are intergenerational. Power is intergenerational. We just launched the first community-owned solar cooperative in the state of New York. And that's a just transition. And we have another one that we're about to launch. So I was told I had a minute, but I just hope that when you walk out of here, that you're walking with your ancestors, that your cells remember that we're here because we have always been strong. So Arche, gracias de corazón.
Oh, tchau. Bom dia a todos e a todas. Agradecer aqui ao nosso grande espírito por esse momento. E cumprimentar aqui a mesa, aos organizadores, agradecer pelo convite. E falar aqui da transição justa no que nós acompanhamos hoje. Na América do Sul e principalmente no Brasil, há momentos de muitas transições que o sistema, que as multinacionais hoje têm feito. Agora a justiça, Nós sempre falamos isso, está difícil de nós encontrarmos com essa justiça, né? Para ser, de fato, uma transição justa do que está acontecendo agora. E eu vejo e proponho que uma das principais desafios nossos, enquanto pessoas, movimentos, instituições e povos resistentes, não existe uma justiça melhor do que a liberdade nossa em nossos territórios, uma liberdade em nossos povos. Eu acho que é a principal atividade que se possa acontecer de justiça com as comunidades. No Brasil, por exemplo, há muitos fatores, há muitas ações de governo, do sistema governamental, que têm se apoderado dos territórios indígenas e de várias comunidades tradicionais. Isso sem a participação das populações, sem reconhecer a nossa maneira tradicional de trabalhar, de se manter através da terra, da natureza, do modo geral. Eu tenho enfrentado uma luta contra essa questão dos créditos de carbono dentro dos territórios do meu povo e demais territórios na Amazônia, porque não é nada mais que o neocolonialismo novamente. Uma colonização sistemática de que o governo quer se apoderar, iludindo as comunidades, sem que as comunidades tenham o poder de decisão, de dizer como quer ou se quer ou não. E esse sistema de capitalizar a floresta, a natureza do modo geral, é um sistema mais cruel que se tem, porque as pessoas que estão na ponta trabalhando, elas não têm o direito de participação. E quando os governos tomam as decisões, não lhe dá mais uma liberdade de que as comunidades possam opinar sobre esses programas. E nas comunidades do meu povo, esse projeto de compensação por serviços ambientais, a primeira coisa que trouxe para a nossa comunidade foi a divisão dos trabalhos dos nossos líderes. Hoje, lideranças que são primos, irmãos, são vistos como inimigos. A outra coisa, a cooptação de algumas lideranças. Essa cooptação, ela enfraqueceu toda uma organização social das nossas comunidades, né? E, enfim, são muitas outras consequências negativas que se trazem, que a gente tem um pouco de raiva e às vezes tem um pouco até de medo, porque a gente não sabe realmente, né, o que vai acontecer no amanhã. Nós temos agora no Brasil um novo governo nacional e a maioria também dos governos dos estados, que são um governo conservacionista de direita ainda, que nessas questões ambientais eles não querem saber absolutamente de nada, né? Porque a única coisa que eles querem saber é do agronegócio, das minerações, dos petróleos, e uma coisa muito prática do que aconteceu de consequências. Grandes crimes ambientais que tiram vida de 300, 200 famílias, e ainda as pessoas ainda afetadas têm que brigar na justiça para poder pelo menos se reconhecer que o seu parente morreu, para poder ter um auxílio dessas empresas que se escusam de não ajudar, né? E aí eu quero me referir aqui ao Denilbira, que, né, do movimento dos atingidos por barragem, que foi o último caso que aconteceu em Brumadinho, né, em Minas Gerais, que acabou mais de 200 famílias, né, e as empresas querem continuar fazendo esse trabalho. Então isso é uma injustiça, por isso que eu estou dizendo no início que não existe a justiça para os menores, né? Então eu queria agradecer, desculpa se eu excedi o tempo, mas muito raucho. Nós estamos, fazendo uma análise e estamos propondo uma diretriz a essa grande Assembleia e queremos a apreciação dessa grande Assembleia, né, que acho que posteriormente vai estar sendo apresentado nessa aliança dos povos indígenas do Sul e do Norte. Obrigado.
Good morning. I'd like to begin by thanking the Great Spirit and the Creator for this historic moment. I'd also like to thank and celebrate the panelists and the organizers of this CJA convening on behalf of Indigenous peoples of the Global South. Well, as you know, we're facing really intense aggressions from the globalization and from the multinational companies, and it seems like justice of any kind is more evasive than ever. And certainly a just transition is a tall order, but be assured that our peoples know that we are the embodiment of freedom, that our territories are the embodiment of freedom and justice, and that our peoples are living our power. In Brazil, a lot of state actors are trying to take over our territories without consulting us, without recognizing our ancestral roots in those lands and those places, and without recognizing that our territories are the inheritance of future generations of our peoples. We're also facing onslaught of carbon credit projects, which is nothing more, nothing less than reheated colonialism, systematic land grabbing, and brutal colonialism to take away our land without hearing our voice, which also commodifies nature and the Amazon and the rainforests. And this carbon colonialism is cruel and it is evil. And the governments are determined to implement it against our will. It has a lot of names. Sometimes it's called carbon offsets or payment for environmental services, but whatever they call it, however they spin it, the impacts are terrible for our peoples. It divides our leaders. It pits brothers and sisters against each other. It's being used to co-opt our social movements, and there are other very dire impacts as well. I am outraged, I am full of rage, and I am also afraid for what this could do to our peoples and to the Amazon. Right now in Brazil, there is a new government that is very right-wing, and they want to cancel any environmental commitment at all and just push very aggressively agribusiness, mining, oil, extractivism, and at the same time there are terrible environmental crimes that continue to occur. Hundreds of families lose their home and are displaced and have no recourse to justice. I'd like to hail my comrade from the Brazilian movement of communities affected by dams. There was a terrible disaster in Minas Gerais of a dam that broke and failed, and I really want you to know that there are families that are suffering from the impact of this kind of extractivism as we speak. And then lastly, I'd like to conclude by letting you know that yesterday some indigenous leaders from the Global South and the Amazon, myself included, met with indigenous brothers and sisters from the North, and we are working on a resolution that we would like this convening to kindly consider, and we look forward to presenting that as we move forward. Thank you very much.